Today's spoiler video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Use the link below to pre-order your cards today. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Guilds of Ravnica spoilers. And today, we have a kind of interesting day. We don't have any mythics, we don't even have a ton of rares, but we have some really interesting lower rarity stuff and some rares slipped in as well. So let's jump right into it, start talking about these crazy new cards. But first, a super quick reminder, if you haven't already, it would be spectacular of you if you'd take a second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So leading things off today, we have a split card, Invent, and you're probably wondering, why are we leading with an uncommon? And there's a very specific reason for this. So Invert says switch the power and toughness of each of up to 2 target creatures. Invent lets you search your library for an instant and or sorcery at instant speed, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So the interesting part about this is there was a bit of a mistake with Invert. If you read that text, switch the power and toughness of each of up to 2 target creatures, what is that missing? It is missing until end of turn. As written, Invert would cause all kinds of problems where you switch the power and toughness of a creature forever, but how do you remember and how do you know what the power and toughness is, and layers and confusion and rules and all this stuff. So this card is getting a day 0 errata. It will officially say until end of turn. It was a mistake with the printing or in the proofreading or whatever, slipped out into the wild without that very important phrase until end of turn. So wanted to make sure that we mention that because it's pretty interesting, pretty important. The card's not going to play exactly as written. As far as the card itself, it reminds me as kind of this split card of Inside Out and Mystical Teachings, although Invent is kind of like a double Mystical Teaching, searching for a instant and a sorcery for just 6 mana is actually a pretty good deal. If you're just getting 1 card, it's pretty expensive, but getting 2 cards, that's actually pretty powerful. You're not only drawing 2, but you're drawing the 2 cards you need for a specific situation. Maybe you get a removal spell or a counter spell that you use right away, and then some big card draw sorcery to use during your turn or something like that. As far as Invert, I don't think it really has much potential in Standard. Traditionally, Invert is used as a way to combo off, primarily in Pauper, with a card like Tireless Tribe. Because of how Magic works and the weirdness of the rules, if you switch the power and toughness of Tireless Tribe, whenever you discard a card, you're actually giving it +4/+0, so you just discard your hand, hit your opponent for 20 damage. I checked, we don't have a Tireless Tribe type effect in Standard. I don't think we have anything that just boosts toughness, other than like one-shot effects, something like Dive Down, that gives a creature +0/+3, that would turn into like a giant growth effect, actually boosting the power and confusion and weirdness, and I don't even understand how all this works. The other thing is you could use it to kill 0-powered creatures, so if walls become a big thing, Arcades takes over Standard, Invert being able to switch the power, which would be 0, to the toughness, which would kill the creature, is relevant. We've seen decks use similar cards in Modern to kill Spellskite when Spellskite gets very popular. As far as Invent, apart from just using it for value, it is a way to tutor up Nexus of Fate. I mean, I imagine it's right on curve. Cast this at the end of your opponent's turn, find your Nexus of Fate, proceed to combo off, and just go crazy, and you get a sorcery for fun. So the big news here is the errata. I don't think Invert is going to be that playable in Standard, although maybe there's a chance there's a creature with 0 power that it's used as a removal spell against. Invent, on the other hand, seems like it could be pretty powerful. Double tutor for 6 mana at instant speed. Not a bad deal in some sort of Jeskai control style deck, or is it control style deck? Next up, we have a crazy Cyclops Shaman, erratic Cyclops. So 4 mana, you get a 0/8. Speaking of things that you might want to kill with Invert Invent, this would be one of them. It does die to 1 mana to Invert Invent, but it has trample, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the spell's converted mana cost. So this is kind of like this weird spell payoff. In Standard, there's not a lot of obvious combos. You're just kind of like casting your stuff, hoping to kill your opponent. I guess Wizard's Lightning, Wizard's Wizard's Retort kind of work. Like, with Wizard's Lightning, you can cast it for 1 mana, but technically it's going to give your erratic Cyclops +3 power, so you get a little bit more value there, but more than likely, you're probably using this with Jumpstart cards, work pretty well with it, like Quasi-Duplicate, copy erratic Cyclops, Jumpstart it, copy erratic Cyclops. Your first Cyclops is like 6 power and smashing your opponent, or Radical Idea, or Unexplained Disappearance. Any of the Jumpstart cards work really well with it, although my guess would be that it might not be super playable. At 4 mana, this effect is pretty safe. It is kind of like a Kiln Fiend, but double the mana cost, and a little bit more challenging because Kiln Fiend gets pumped +3 no matter what the converted mana cost is. So it's like a safer version of Kiln Fiend, although Trample is nice, and if you're playing this in casual formats, you could do some really fun things with it with things that cheat on mana cost. Like Delve is a great example of this. If you cast a Dig Through Time in your commander deck, you're going to be giving Erratic Cyclops +8, but you're probably only casting Dig Through Time for 2 mana, or Treasure Cruise for 1 mana, thanks to Delve, or even Murderous Cut +5 for only 1 mana. So there's some cool things you could do in like casual decks. Some of them you can do in Modern, although Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time are banned. So I think that Erratic Cyclops is a really fun, spicy card. It really encaptures the kind of feeling of Izzet, with this like random spell slinging type ability, but I'd be a little bit surprised if it actually caught on in Standard. It just takes a lot of work to actually make it good. Maybe if having an 8 toughness blocker is relevant, it could get there, but I expect that it probably will just be a little bit too hard to make work to really be a competitive card in Standard, but it's a really cool, really fun build around. We also got another split card, Integrity Intervention. So this one, I think this is just a limited only card. Front half is basically a built to last. 1 Boros hybrid mana, give a creature +2/+2 until end of turn. The back half is a Lightning Helix, except it's kind of double the cost. It's exactly Lightning Helix's text, except you gotta pay 4 mana instead of 2 mana. So I think this is a card that is very strong in Limited, and Limited, a 4 mana Lightning Helix isn't that bad, and the combat trick part is relevant. As far as Standard, I would be a little surprised. Combat tricks aren't super popular in Standard. 4 mana Lightning Helix is probably a little bit too much for what you're getting, but yeah, maybe in a very specific deck. So I think Integrity Intervention, most likely going to be a Limited All-Star and a very high pick in Limited, but not something that really breaks into Standard. We also got some spice in Mission Briefing. So Mission Briefing is kind of like a new Snapcaster, except an instant. So 2 mana, you get to Surveil 2, choose an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. You can cast that card this turn. If the card we put in your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So essentially, you Surveil 2 and then give an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard flashback. It's not keyworded flashback, but it is essentially flashback. So this card is kind of like Flood of Recollection. That would be the most obvious comparison, because Flood of Recollection, 2 mana, it is a sorcery rather than an instant, and you return the card to your hand so then you can cast it. Mission Briefing, though, it is way more powerful than that. People are underestimating, I think, Surveil. People have often said that scrying is maybe worth drawing half a card or 0.6 of a card or something like that. Surveil is essentially strictly better scrying, and that means that Surveilling 2 here is roughly equivalent to drawing a card, and then you're actually drawing a card, which is the card that you target in your graveyard, assuming that you have the mana to cast it, which you should. So this is kind of like an Anticipate or even a Chart a Course, where it's a cheap way to generate card advantage by getting that Surveil 2 and then casting the best instant or sorcery for the situation in your library. It's pretty sweet that it's an instant as well. This means for like 5 mana, you can Sinister Sabotage, again, from your graveyard. You cast Mission Briefing, cast the Sinister Sabotage, do a ton of surveilling. For 4 mana, you can Assassin's Trophy again. Wizard's Lightning, if you got a wizard out, is pretty cute. You could do kind of the Bolt, Snap, Bolt, but Briefing, Lightning, Briefing, something like that. So I think there's some chance that this shows up in Standard. I think that it's going to be underrated because it looks similar to cards that have been unplayable in the past, but the combination of being instant speed and Surveilling 2, which is worth close to drawing a card, maybe more than drawing a card, honestly, is going to make this card a little bit more competitive than most people think right off the bat. As far as Modern is concerned, a little bit less exciting because you have literal Snapcaster Mage, and most of the time having a 2/1 body that you can like bounce back to your hand with Cryptic Command or attack and block with is going to be better than Surveilling 2. However, there's a chance in very specific decks that you could make an argument that this is kinda maybe better than Snapcaster Mage. Like if you're trying to fuel Gurmag Anglers or get cards in your graveyard for Past in Flames in a Storm deck, I think there's some argument that maybe the milling over of 2 cards is actually more powerful than having a 2/1 body, depending on your build. So I think in general, Mission Briefing, definitely less powerful than Snapcaster, which isn't a surprise because Snapcaster is one of the best cards, maybe the best card in the Modern format, but I could see Mission Briefing having an impact in Modern in decks that really value dumping cards in their graveyard because you can still get back your Lightning Bolt as a removal spell or a Thoughtseize or something, but you're also able to get cards in your graveyard rather than taking cards out of your graveyard with Snapcaster Mage. One other thing about Mission Briefing, I was a little confused by this at first, but it has been confirmed, timing restrictions still apply. So even though it's an instant, if you cast this during your opponent's turn and target a sorcery, you cannot cast that sorcery. You still have to cast the sorcery only during your turn. So basically, during your turn, you can Mission Briefing for an instant or sorcery. During your opponent's turn, you want to make sure that you target an instant. If you target a sorcery, you will not legally be able to cast that spell. So keep that in mind as your Mission Briefing. So I think this card might be a bit of a sleeper. I think it's a lot better than it actually looks. Surveil is underrated. It does have some similarities to Snapcaster Mage, trading, surveilling for the body on the battlefield. There's less shenanigans with bouncing and repeating your Snapcaster Mage, but milling over cards is a valuable ability, so I'm excited to see what happens with Mission Briefing, both in Standard and maybe even in Modern. Otherwise today, we have a parade of lore rarity stuff, but thankfully, we got some spicy lore rarity stuff, starting with True Fire Captain. So unofficial translation here, but 4 mana, 2 red and 2 white, so a little tricky to cast, has Mentor, you get a 4/3, however the sweet thing here is whenever True Fire Captain is dealt damage, it deals equal damage to target player. So this is kind of reminiscent of Boros Reckoner, of Spite-Mare. There is a bit of a drawback here. The drawback is, with Boros Reckoner and Spite-Mare, you could throw damage at an opposing creature, so it's kind of often a 2-for-1. Like if your opponent attacks into Boros Reckoner, you can block and maybe kill something, and then throw the damage at something else to kill something. You can't do that with True Fire Captain because the damage always goes to your opponent's face. However, there is a sweet against the odd style combo in Standard, and that is Star of Extinction. So Star of Extinction, 20 damage to each creature. That means if you can cast a True Fire Champion and then resolve a Star of Extinction, True Fire Champion takes 20 damage. You basically throw that 20 damage at your opponent's face. Starting life total in Magic is 20, so basically a 2-card win the game combo, assuming your opponent didn't gain any life or anything like that. So I expect that we will be playing this one at some point. Maybe with Firesong and Sunspeaker, True Fire Champion, Star of Extinction against the odds, because I think the combo is just hilarious. I don't think it'll be competitive. It probably will be a tier 3 casual type deck, but man, is it going to be awesome when you one-shot your opponent with a Star of Extinction. Next up, we have Centaur Mediator, and this card is a little bit weird. 3 mana, you get a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, each player gains 4 life. So you might be thinking, well, why would I want my opponent to gain life? That's kind of weird. The big thing is, 4 life is a lot, and if you're playing, let's say, Modern, or even in Standard against a deck like Mono Red Aggro, you're getting basically a Kitchen Finks amount of life gain, but you're getting it all at once. 4 is a good chunk, and if you are playing kind of a mid-rangey deck, maybe even a controlling deck, like a bat and control deck or something, you are perfectly fine with your burn opponent or mono red aggro opponent gaining 4 life if you gain 4 life, because you're going to win the long game anyway. It's all just about stabilizing and staying alive because you have the more powerful late game cards. So I actually think this card is pretty legit. I think it will definitely show up if there is a deck like red-black aggro, mono-red aggro, that style of deck, popular in Standard, this will at least be a sideboard staple, because that is a huge chunk of life gain in those matchups, and a 3/3 for 3 isn't bad, and I think there's even a chance that you could see this in Modern. There are some issues. 4 life is what you get from Lone Missionary, so maybe there's some competition there, but the body is much better. I could imagine this being a core target, where you just need that chunk of life against burn, tutor up, gain 4 all at once. It's a little bit better in some situations than gaining 2 with Kitchen Finks, because maybe your opponent still has enough burn spells to kill you through 2 life, but not through 4 life. So I think there's even an outside chance that you will be able to play this in Modern. So keep in mind, making your opponent gain 4 life if you're playing an aggro mirror, it's obviously not great. This card is doing nothing. But if you're playing mid-range or control against the aggro deck or the burn deck, then making both players gain 4 life is definitely beneficial for the person on the slower deck with the better late game power. So even though it seems weird, I think this card is actually very strong and has a lot of potential. Next up, we have Golgari Findbroker. 4 mana. Apparently there's a whole cycle of these cards for guilds. Double of each color, uncommons. When it enters the battlefield, you get to return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is kind of like a bigger Eternal Witness that trades the ability to get back spells. You can only get permanents with Findbroker for a much more reasonable body. A 3/4 for 4 is much better than a 2/1 for 3. So we'll see. I actually think this card is insane and limited. 2 of these, you just grind your opponent out of the game, keep getting one back, having this big body at a pretty reasonable cost. And it's not impossible it shows up in Standard as well. In something like Madrotha or with Surveil, where you're milling cards into your own graveyard, and this is going to let you get back your Planeswalker, get back a land, get back your best creature, artifact, enchantment. Permanent covers a lot of things, so I think there's some potential for Standard here in a Golgari deck, and definitely a very strong uncommon for Golgari in Limited. We also got Lava Coil, which is maybe our new chase burn spell, removal spell from the set. So we need something to replace a Braid. A Braid is rotating, and this might very well be it. 2 mana, 4 damage to a creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So this is a card that takes down a lot of popular threats in Standard for 2 mana. There are some threats, like Steel Leaf Champion, Shalai Voice of Plenty, which get around a Braid, but Lava Coil deals with for no problem. And that doesn't even include things like Rekindling Phoenix, or the new Phoenix that we're getting in Guilds of Ravnica, recursive threats that keep coming back from the graveyard. That makes the exile clause on Lava Coil actually very important and very good. 2 mana, just clean answer to Rekindling Phoenix, Steel Leaf Champion, Shalai Voice of Plenty. In our upcoming Standard format, where Kaladesh artifacts, vehicles have rotated, I think there is an argument that Lava Coil might just replace a Braid. Like, it might be that 4 damage and exiling is almost equivalent to a Braid being able to hit artifacts, because I expect we'll see a lot less artifacts running around once Kaladesh leaves the format. So definitely worth keeping in mind. Worst case, a great sideboard option to deal with things like Rekindling Phoenixes. Best case, depending on how the metagame shakes out, this could be a 2, 3, 4 of main deck removal spell to deal with big annoying threats very early in the game out of your red deck. We also got some Guild Mages. Guild Mages are back. These cards, I don't think any of them have a ton of Standard potential. Swarm Guild Mage gives your team menace, gains you some life. League Guild Mage, pay 4, tap, draw a card isn't the worst, as their Mage has seen play before. Copying an instant or sorcery spell you control, kind of mana intensive, but still kind of cute. If you cast an Opt for 2 additional mana, you can copy that Opt, which is kind of value. And then Conclave Guild Mage, trampling your team is fine. 6 to make a 2/2 token, I guess, is also relatively fine. So we'll see. In the past, Guild Mages have sometimes shown up in Standard decks. There's nothing on any of these cards that jumps out as, oh my god, this card is so busted. It's gonna definitely show up in Standard, but it's worth keeping in mind in your colors. I think out of this list, the one that is closest for me is League Guild Mage. In a control mirror, 4 to draw a card isn't bad, and then if you're casting cheap instants and sorceries, the cheapness of the copying ability, like imagine it's a wizard, so you can Wizard's Lightning for 1 mana, 2 more mana, copy it with League Guild Mage, and you end up getting 6 damage worth of burn spells for 3 mana. That's actually a pretty efficient deal. So maybe League Guild Mage could have a shot based on its creature type, based on its colors, depending on what the metagame looks like. The rest of them, I mean, they're fine if you need to gain life in your Golgari deck. Swarm Guild Mage is fine. A nice mana sync with Conclave Guild Mage making the token, but I think that we'll have to wait and see as far as their Standard potential. Finally today, a few more commons and uncommons. Golgari Raiders can be very threatening if you have a ton of creatures in your graveyard, can also be very uncastable if you have 0 creatures in your graveyard. Never happen, a weird twist on a Thoughtseize effect. You can steal a card from your opponent's graveyard or their hand and exile it, but 3 mana is kind of a lot for constructed. And then Price of Fame is an interesting removal spell. We were talking earlier about Surveil adding up to draw a card if you're surveilling 2. So if you think of this as 4 mana, kill a creature, draw a card, that's kind of close to constructed. I think the real power, though, is it's only 2 mana on legendary creatures. So if we get in a format where Lyra's dominating the format, or other legends, probably from Dominaria block, which had so many legends, and you're reasonably going to be able to target a legend in most matchups, then this card is very good. When it is 2 mana, kill your opponent's best creature or one of their good creatures, draw a card, and Surveil 2, that is a chase removal spell. So we'll see how heavily legends are played. I expect that this will crop up at least a little bit in standard because Surveil, very powerful ability. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Guilds of Ravnica spoilers for today. So what do you think about Invert Invent and the errata? How did Wizards manage to leave off until end to turn on that card? I don't get it. What about erratic Cyclops? Is there any combos? Is there any ways to kill people with it? How about the other split cards, Integrity, Invention? What about Mission Briefing? Is that the Jumpcaster Mage we've been waiting for? How good is that card? Can it show up in Standard? Can it show up in Modern? How do you value Surveil 2? What about Truefire Champion? Can the Star of Extinction combo work? Centaur Mediator? What about making your opponent gain life along with yourself? All the other comments and uncomments, let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.